The world dissolved into a haze of disbelief as the words echoed in my ears, each syllable a hammer blow against the fragile foundation of my reality. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from a cold, simmering rage that threatened to consume me. I stood frozen, the phone clattering to the floor, the weight of the betrayal crushing the air from my lungs. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart, a desperate drumbeat against the impending storm. If you have ever felt betrayed by someone you considered family, subscribe now and share your story. Let's build a community of survivors together. My life had always been defined by a sense of duty, a quiet obligation to the people I loved. My father, a man of few words but immense presence, had instilled in me the importance of family above all else. I had always strived to be the daughter he wanted, the successful one, the one who made him proud. That drive led me to pour every ounce of my being into my career, culminating in the purchase of my dream home, a sprawling, sun-drenched property overlooking the Pacific. It was my sanctuary, my reward for years of relentless dedication, a testament to the sacrifices I had made. The house was worth nearly $1 million, a fortune I had earned through blood, sweat, and sleepless nights. I pictured my father's face, etched with pride, as I handed him the keys for a visit, a small token of my gratitude for everything he had done. But beneath the surface of our seemingly perfect relationship, resentment was quietly brewing, like an insidious poison slowly seeping into the roots of a once thriving tree. "Violet," I kept telling myself, "you are doing this for them." The phone call started innocently enough. My father had called to ask about my health, a common occurrence since my recent diagnosis. I had been struggling with a debilitating illness, one that had forced me to take a leave of absence from work, a fact that seemed to irk him more than concern him. I assured him I was managing, trying to maintain a positive outlook despite the constant pain and uncertainty. As the conversation wound down, I heard the familiar click of the phone disconnecting, or so I thought. I was about to hang up my own phone when a voice, unmistakably my father's, floated through the speaker, laced with a venom I had never heard before. He was talking to my brother, Mark. I heard him say, "She's a burden. She thinks we don't notice how much she's costing us. All those visits, the worry. It's exhausting." My heart plummeted. I wanted to scream, to interrupt, to defend myself, but I was paralyzed, held captive by the shocking revelation of his true feelings. Mark chimed in, "I know, Dad, and that house. It's just sitting there empty. What's she even doing with it? She needs to sell it and get something smaller, something she can actually manage." The crimson began rising in my cheeks. My father continued, his voice hardening. "Exactly. She's too stubborn to admit she needs help, and all that money tied up in the house. It could be put to much better use. We need to talk to her. We need to convince her to do what's best for the family, even if she doesn't realize it herself." The conversation continued for several minutes, a litany of complaints and thinly veiled contempt, each word a fresh wound on my already battered soul. They spoke of me as if I were a problem to be solved, a financial liability to be managed, not a daughter or a sister worthy of love and compassion. The person I trusted most was one of them. The weight of their betrayal settled upon me like a shroud, suffocating my spirit. Sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Each night I tossed and turned, replaying the phone call in my mind, the venomous words echoing in the darkness. The faces of my father and brother, once symbols of love and support, were now distorted by resentment and greed. My beautiful house, once a source of pride and joy, now felt like a gilded cage, trapping me in a web of their making. The illness that already ravaged my body was now compounded by the emotional devastation of their actions. I tried to rationalize their behavior, to find some explanation that would soften the blow, but the truth was inescapable. They saw me as a burden, an obstacle to their own financial gain. The crimson burned in my eyes. I decided to confront them. Maybe it was naive, a desperate attempt to salvage what was left of our family, but I couldn't bear to live with the lie any longer. I arranged a meeting at my house, hoping that the familiar surroundings would foster a sense of connection and understanding. When they arrived, their faces were carefully composed, masks of concern concealing the avarice that lurked beneath. I started tentatively, sharing my struggles with my illness, my fears about the future, my need for their support. My voice trembled as I spoke, the weight of their betrayal making it difficult to breathe. My father listened with a stony expression, offering only perfunctory nods of sympathy. Mark fidgeted, his eyes darting around the room, taking in the expensive furnishings, the panoramic view. When I finished, the silence hung heavy in the air, punctuated only by the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then my father spoke, his voice devoid of emotion. "Violet," he said, "we're worried about you. This house is too much for you to handle. It's draining your resources both financially and emotionally. We think it's time for you to consider selling it." My heart sank. It was even worse than I had imagined. They weren't even trying to hide their true intentions. "But this is my home," I protested, my voice rising in desperation. "I've worked so hard for this. It's my sanctuary," Mark scoffed. "Sanctuary. You're sick, Violet. You can barely take care of yourself, let alone a house this size. It's not practical. It's just sitting here depreciating in value. You could use the money to pay for your treatments to secure your future." I stared at them in disbelief, the full extent of their callousness washing over me. They had reduced me to a financial transaction, a commodity to be bought and sold. The room seemed to spin, the walls closing in, the air growing thin. "So that's what this is about, isn't it?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You don't care about me, you just want my money." My father sighed as if I were being deliberately difficult. "Don't be ridiculous, Violet. Of course we care about you, but we also have to be realistic. We're just trying to help you make the right decision." "The right decision for whom?" I retorted, my anger finally erupting. "For you, so you can get your hands on my money. So you can finally have what you think you deserve." Mark's face flushed. "That's not fair," he snapped. "We've always been there for you. We've sacrificed so much for you." "Sacrificed?" I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "What have you sacrificed? You've always taken, 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 and now you want to take my house, my security, my future." The argument escalated, the air thick with accusations and recriminations. I pleaded with them to see reason, to understand the emotional significance of the house, but they remained unmoved, their eyes fixed on the potential financial gain. The conversation ended in a stalemate, a chasm of resentment and distrust widening between us. They left my house, their faces set in grim determination, leaving me alone with the shattered remains of my family. I felt the darkness closing in. This was far from over. The following weeks were a blur of anxiety and despair. My father and brother began a campaign of relentless pressure, calling me constantly, sending manipulative text messages, even enlisting other family members to persuade me to sell the house. They preyed on my vulnerability, exploiting my illness, my loneliness, my fear of the future. I felt like a cornered animal, desperately trying to defend myself against a relentless onslaught. I refused to give in, clinging to my house as if it were a lifeline, the last vestige of my independence and identity. But the constant stress took its toll, exacerbating my illness, weakening my resolve. I started to doubt myself, to question my own sanity. Was I being selfish? Was I being unreasonable? Was I truly incapable of managing my own affairs? The seeds of doubt they had planted began to take root, poisoning my mind, eroding my spirit. I would find myself staring out at the ocean, the waves crashing against the shore, feeling a sense of utter hopelessness. The thought of giving up, of surrendering to their demands, became increasingly tempting. Maybe it would be easier, I thought. Maybe it would bring an end to the constant pressure, the relentless anxiety. But then I would remember the phone call, the venom in my father's voice, the greed in my brother's eyes, and the crimson would return. I knew I couldn't let them win. I knew I had to fight back, not just for myself, but for everyone who had ever been betrayed by those they loved. The plan had begun. The day they initiated legal proceedings was the day something inside me broke, and something else, something colder and harder, was forged in its place. I received the letter, a sterile, impersonal document filled with legal jargon, informing me that my father and brother were seeking guardianship, claiming I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. They were using my illness against me, twisting my vulnerability into a weapon to strip me of my autonomy. The words on the page seemed to swim before my eyes, blurring into an incomprehensible mess. I felt a surge of nausea, a wave of dizziness that threatened to send me crashing to the floor. This was it, I thought. This was the end. They were going to take everything from me, my house, my money, my freedom, my very identity. I stumbled to the bathroom, the cold tile shocking my bare feet. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, a gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger staring back. Was this really me? Had I become so weak, so helpless, that I was no longer able to defend myself? A tear escaped my eye, tracing a lonely path down my cheek. I felt a wave of despair wash over me, threatening to pull me under. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the darkness, letting the waves crash over me, pulling me further and further into the abyss. I was so tired, so weary of fighting, so ready to give up. I sank to the floor, curling into a fetal position, the cold tile seeping into my bones. I lay there for what seemed like an eternity, lost in a sea of grief and self-pity. The world outside faded away, replaced by the deafening silence of my own despair. The phone rang incessantly, but I ignored it, letting it ring and ring until it finally fell silent. I didn't want to talk to anyone, to see anyone, to feel anything. I just wanted to disappear, to cease to exist, to escape the pain and the betrayal. I was so close to letting it all go. But then a flicker, a tiny spark of defiance ignited in the depths of my despair. A memory surfaced, unbidden, a vision of my younger self, a girl full of dreams and aspirations, a girl who refused to be defeated. I remembered my father's words, his constant refrain, "Never give up, Violet, never let them see you sweat." I had always strived to live up to his expectations, to be the strong, successful daughter he wanted me to be. But now his words felt like a betrayal, a cruel reminder of the man he had become. But still, the underlying message resonated. I would not be defeated. I would not let them win. I would not surrender to the darkness. The spark grew stronger, fueled by a surge of anger, a burning desire for justice, for revenge. I pushed myself up from the floor, my body aching, my mind still reeling, but my resolve hardened. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection with new eyes. The gaunt, hollow-eyed stranger was still there, but now there was something else, something steely, something determined. I would not let them break me. I would use their betrayal as fuel, as motivation, as a weapon against them. I would turn their cruelty against them. I would make them pay for what they had done. The crimson burned brighter. The first step was to gather information. I needed to know everything about their plan, their strategy, their weaknesses. I started discreetly, reaching out to family members, friends, and acquaintances, probing for information, piecing together the puzzle of their deception. I discovered that their financial situation was far more precarious than I had realized. My brother, Mark, had been struggling with gambling debts, and my father had secretly mortgaged his house to cover them. They were desperate for money, and my house was their only hope. The realization filled me with a cold, calculating rage. They weren't just betraying me, they were using me, exploiting my vulnerability for their own selfish gain. I also learned that they had been bad-mouthing me to other family members, spreading lies and rumors about my mental state, painting me as unstable and incapable. They were trying to isolate me, to turn everyone against me, to make it easier to take control of my life. I felt a surge of fury, a desire to lash out, to expose their lies and reveal their true nature. But I knew I had to remain calm, to control my emotions, to play their game. I needed to gather more evidence, to build a solid case against them, to ensure that my revenge was swift, decisive, and irreversible. I started documenting everything, recording every phone call, saving every text message, keeping a detailed journal of their actions and their words. I consulted with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who listened to my story with a knowing look in her eyes. She advised me to remain calm, to cooperate with their demands, to lull them into a false sense of security. "Let them think they're winning," she said. "Let them underestimate you. That's when you'll have the element of surprise." I took her advice to heart, adopting a passive, compliant demeanor, pretending to be broken and defeated. I agreed to meet with them to discuss their plans for my future, to consider their offer to sell the house. I listened patiently as they laid out their scheme, their voices dripping with false concern, their eyes gleaming with avarice. I nodded and smiled, playing the part of the docile, compliant victim. But inside, I was seething, counting the seconds until I could unleash my revenge. Their biggest weakness. They thought they were untouchable. I smiled. I acted broken, but I was recording everything. The hunter became the hunted. I continued to play the role of the defeated daughter, agreeing to their every suggestion, nodding along to their carefully crafted lies. I even started packing up some of my belongings, making it look like I was preparing to move out. They ate it up, their greed blinding them to the truth. But behind the facade, I was meticulously crafting my revenge. I consulted with my lawyer on the legality of recording conversations, ensuring that I was within my rights to document their deceit. I purchased hidden cameras, strategically placing them throughout my house, capturing their every word and action. I wanted irrefutable proof of their manipulation, their lies, their avarice. I also contacted a forensic accountant, a specialist in uncovering financial fraud. I provided him with my father's and brother's financial records, bank statements, and investment portfolios. I knew they were hiding something, and I was determined to find it. The accountant started digging, tracing their transactions, uncovering their hidden assets, and exposing their web of deceit. The pressure was immense. There were moments when I felt like I was going to crack, when the weight of their betrayal threatened to crush me. But I kept going, fueled by the burning desire for justice, for revenge. I knew that the truth was my most powerful weapon, and I was determined to use it to destroy them. One afternoon, my brother, Mark, came to my house, ostensibly to help me pack. I greeted him with a weak smile, pretending to be grateful for his assistance. As he rummaged through my belongings, making condescending comments about my lavish lifestyle, I subtly activated one of the hidden cameras. He started asking probing questions about my financial affairs, trying to get me to reveal the extent of my assets. I played along, feigning ignorance, giving him vague, misleading answers. He seemed frustrated, his impatience growing with each passing minute. Finally, he couldn't contain himself any longer. "Violet," he said, his voice dripping with false concern, "are you sure you're making the right decision about the house? You know, we're just trying to help you. We don't want you to make a mistake that you'll regret later." I looked at him, my eyes filled with fake tears. "I don't know what to do, Mark," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm so confused. I just want what's best for everyone." He put his arm around me, his touch feeling like a violation. "Don't worry, Violet," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial. "We'll take care of you. We'll make sure you're okay. Just trust us." I nodded, pretending to be comforted by his words. But inside, I was seething. I couldn't wait to expose him for the manipulative liar he was. The camera was rolling. As the days passed, I meticulously gathered evidence, building an airtight case against my father and brother. The forensic accountant uncovered a series of suspicious transactions, revealing that they had been secretly transferring money from my accounts to their own. He also discovered that they had taken out several loans in my name without my consent, using my house as collateral. They were systematically draining my assets, lining their own pockets with my hard-earned money. I felt a surge of rage, a desire to confront them immediately. But I knew I had to be patient, to wait for the perfect moment to strike. I shared the evidence with my lawyer, who was impressed by the thoroughness of my investigation. She assured me that we had a strong case, that we could not only prevent them from gaining guardianship, but also hold them accountable for their crimes. She advised me to continue gathering evidence, to document every interaction, to build an unassailable record of their deceit. The anticipation was almost unbearable. I longed to expose them, to watch their faces crumble as their lies were revealed. But I knew that patience was key. I had to wait for the right moment to ensure that my revenge was complete and irreversible. They thought they were so clever, so untouchable. They had no idea what was coming. The tension in the house was palpable. My father and brother were growing increasingly impatient, pressuring me to sign the papers that would give them control of my affairs. They called me constantly, their voices laced with veiled threats, their desperation growing more evident with each passing day. I continued to play along, feigning ignorance, pretending to be swayed by their arguments. I even agreed to meet with a real estate agent they had recommended, a smarmy, opportunistic man who seemed to be in on their scheme. He walked through my house, his eyes gleaming with avarice, making insulting comments about its deferred maintenance and its limited appeal. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to throw him out. I knew that every interaction, every conversation was being recorded, that every detail would be used against them in court. The day they tried to force my hand was the day I was ready. I had all the evidence I needed. I had the recordings, the financial records, the legal expertise. I was ready to unleash my revenge. The only thing left to do was to wait for the perfect moment. I just smiled. The breakthrough came unexpectedly, a chance discovery hidden within the mountain of financial documents the forensic accountant had provided. It wasn't a smoking gun, not at first. It was a seemingly innocuous series of wire transfers, small amounts sent to an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Individually, they were insignificant, easily overlooked. But the accountant, a man with the tenacity of a bloodhound, noticed a pattern. The transfers coincided with specific dates on which my father and brother had pressured me to make certain financial decisions, dates on which they had steered me towards particular investments. He dug deeper, tracing the flow of money, unraveling the intricate web of deceit. The offshore account he discovered was controlled by a shell corporation, a front for a network of illicit activities, and the beneficiary of that account, a prominent judge, a man known for his conservative views and his unwavering loyalty to the old guard. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. They had bribed the judge. They had secured their victory in advance, ensuring that the guardianship hearing would be nothing more than a formality. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just about greed, about money. This was about power, about corruption, about a system rigged against the vulnerable. I felt a surge of nausea, a wave of dizziness that threatened to send me spiraling into the abyss. But I fought back, clinging to the truth, refusing to let them win. The judge's involvement was their ultimate weakness. They were so confident in their ability to manipulate the system, so arrogant in their belief that they were untouchable, that they had become careless. They had left a trail, a digital breadcrumb trail that led directly to their doorstep. I had them. I immediately contacted my lawyer, relaying the new information, sharing the evidence the accountant had uncovered. She was stunned, her voice tight with controlled fury. "This changes everything," she said. "This is no longer just a family matter. This is a criminal conspiracy. We need to go to the authorities." I hesitated. Going to the authorities would expose their crimes, but it would also alert them to my plan. They would have a chance to cover their tracks, to destroy the evidence, to disappear. I needed to control the narrative, to dictate the terms of my revenge. "Not yet," I said. "I want to wait. I want to give them one last chance to incriminate themselves." My lawyer was hesitant, but she understood my desire for closure, for justice. She agreed to hold off on contacting the authorities, but she warned me to be careful, to protect myself. "They're dangerous people, Violet," she said. "Don't underestimate them." I knew she was right, but I was no longer afraid. I was armed with the truth, with the knowledge of their betrayal, with the unwavering determination to make them pay. The hunter had become the hunted, and I was closing in for the kill. The trap was set. The final act of my carefully orchestrated plan involved a staged meeting, a confrontation designed to lure them into a false sense of security, to extract one final, irrefutable confession. I called my father and brother, telling them that I had reconsidered their offer, that I was ready to sign the papers, to relinquish control of my affairs. I feigned exhaustion, desperation, a complete surrender. They were ecstatic, their voices bubbling with excitement. They insisted on coming over immediately, eager to finalize the deal, to seal their victory. I agreed, setting the stage for their downfall. I made sure the hidden cameras were fully charged, strategically positioned to capture every angle of the room. I prepared a light meal, a final supper of sorts, laced with a subtle sedative enough to loosen their tongues, to lower their inhibitions. As I waited for them to arrive, I felt a strange sense of calm, a quiet certainty that everything was about to change. The storm was coming. They arrived promptly, their faces flushed with anticipation, their eyes gleaming with avarice. My father, ever the patriarch, took the lead, offering insincere words of comfort, patting my hand with a condescending air. My brother, Mark, hovered in the background, his gaze darting around the room, assessing the value of my possessions, calculating his share of the spoils. I led them to the dining room, where the papers were laid out on the table, ready for my signature. I poured them each a glass of wine, careful to add the sedative to their drinks. As they sipped their wine, I launched into my performance, a carefully rehearsed monologue of despair and resignation. I spoke of my failing health, my inability to cope, my desperate need for their help. I painted a picture of utter helplessness, of complete surrender. They ate it up, their greed blinding them to the truth. As the sedative began to take effect, their inhibitions loosened, their tongues wagged. They started boasting about their cleverness, their manipulation, their imminent victory. They reveled in their deceit, unaware that every word was being recorded, every confession was being captured. They bragged about bribing the judge, about forging my signature, about draining my assets. They confessed to everything. Then the moment of truth. My father, emboldened by the wine and the sedative, leaned forward, his eyes glinting with a predatory hunger. "You know, Violet," he said, his voice low and conspiratorial, "we're doing this for your own good. You're not capable of making decisions for yourself. You need us to take care of you." Mark nodded in agreement, his gaze fixed on the papers, eager to get them signed. I looked at them, my eyes filled with a cold, steely rage. The moment had arrived. "Is that so?" I said, my voice barely a whisper. "Then why did you bribe the judge?" The color drained from their faces. Their eyes widened in disbelief. They stared at me, speechless, their carefully constructed facade crumbling before their eyes. The trap had sprung. Before they could speak, could react, could deny, I pressed play on the hidden recorder. Their own voices filled the room, their confessions echoing in the silence, their deceit laid bare for all to hear. Their faces contorted in a mixture of fear, anger, and disbelief. They knew they were caught. Their game was over. Just as they moved to lunge at me to silence the recording, the front door burst open and my lawyer stepped into the room, followed by 2 police officers. "You're under arrest," she said, her voice ringing with authority. My father and brother stood frozen, their faces masks of utter despair. The police officers moved forward, handcuffing them, leading them away in disgrace. As they were being escorted out of the house, my father turned to me, his eyes filled with hatred. "You haven't won, Violet," he spat. "This isn't over." I just smiled. The exact day they tried to end me, I exposed the truth. The courtroom was packed, every seat filled with reporters, curious onlookers, and members of my extended family, their faces a mixture of shock and morbid fascination. My father and brother sat at the defendant's table, their shoulders slumped, their eyes hollow. The judge, the one they had so brazenly tried to buy, sat stone-faced on the bench, his reputation hanging by a thread. My lawyer presented the evidence, meticulously laying out the case against them. The recordings were played, their voices echoing through the room, their confessions damning. The forensic accountant testified, explaining the intricate web of financial fraud they had perpetrated. The real estate agent squirmed in his seat, trying to distance himself from their scheme, his testimony further solidifying their guilt. The judge, despite his best efforts to remain impartial, could not ignore the overwhelming evidence. The crimson stains of their corruption were too visible. When it was my turn to speak, I stood tall, my voice clear and unwavering. I spoke of their betrayal, their greed, their abuse of power. I spoke of the pain they had inflicted, the fear they had instilled. I spoke of my determination to seek justice, to hold them accountable for their actions. I looked directly at my father and brother, their faces etched with shame. "You thought you could get away with it," I said, my voice filled with quiet fury. "You thought you could manipulate me, control me, steal from me. But you were wrong. I am not your victim. I am your reckoning." The jury deliberated for hours, the tension in the courtroom building with each passing minute. Finally, the verdict was read. Guilty, guilty on all counts. A collective gasp swept through the room. My father and brother were sentenced to significant prison terms, their lives irrevocably shattered. The judge, exposed for his corruption, was removed from the bench, his career in ruins. Their world had crumbled. The fallout was swift and brutal. My father and brother were disowned by most of our family. Their friends abandoned them. Their businesses collapsed. They lost everything. Their reputations were tarnished beyond repair. They became pariahs, symbols of greed and corruption. Even in prison, there was no escape. They were subjected to constant ridicule and abuse, their every move scrutinized, their every weakness exploited. They had become what they had always feared, powerless, vulnerable, alone. I watched it all unfold, a sense of detached satisfaction washing over me. I had achieved my revenge. I had exposed their lies, dismantled their scheme, and brought them to justice. They had tried to break me, to steal my life, to leave me with nothing. But I had survived. I had thrived. I had emerged stronger, more resilient, more determined than ever before. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I sold the house, severing the last remaining tie to my past. I donated a significant portion of my inheritance to charity, using their ill-gotten gains to help those in need. I reconnected with old friends, forging new relationships based on trust and mutual respect. I pursued my passions, exploring new hobbies, traveling to new places, embracing life to the fullest. The darkness that had once consumed me began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of peace, of purpose, of hope. I finally understood that revenge, while necessary, was not the ultimate goal. The ultimate goal was healing, was moving on, was creating a life filled with joy, love, and meaning. I had silenced my demons, but that didn't mean they could never return. I had achieved justice, but that didn't mean there would never be injustice again. I had found peace, but that didn't mean the world would always be peaceful. I received a letter from my father, a rambling, incoherent plea for forgiveness. He claimed to be remorseful, to regret his actions, to miss me. I didn't respond. Some wounds cannot be healed. Some betrayals cannot be forgiven. I had given them a chance to be decent human beings, and they had chosen greed and corruption. They had made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. They lost everything. I just smiled. Revenge isn't sweet. It's necessary. Would you have done the same? Let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more justice.